The Indian Rebellion of 1857 refers to a rebellion in India against the rule of the British East India Company, that ran from May 1857 to June 1858. The rebellion began as a mutiny of sepoys of the East India Company's army on 10 May 1857, in the cantonment of the town of Meerut, and soon escalated into other mutinies and civilian rebellions largely in the upper Gangetic Plain and central India, with the major hostilities confined to present-day Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, northern Madhya Pradesh, and the Delhi region. The rebellion posed a considerable threat to East India Company power in that region, and was contained only with the fall of Gwalior on 20 June 1858. The rebellion is also known as India's First War of Independence, the Great Rebellion, the Indian Rebellion, the Indian Mutiny, the Revolt of 1857, the Rebellion of 1857, the Uprising of 1857, the Sepoy Rebellion, the Indian Insurrection and the Sepoy Mutiny. Other regions of company-controlled India, such as Bengal, the Bombay Presidency, and the Madras Presidency, remained largely calm. In Punjab, the Sikh princes backed the company by providing soldiers and support. The large princely states of Hyderabad, Mysore, Travancore, and Kashmir, as well as the smaller ones of Rajputana, did not join the rebellion. In some regions, such as Oudh, the rebellion took on the attributes of a patriotic revolt against European presence. Maratha leaders, such as Lakshmi Bai, the Rani of Jhansi, became folk heroes in the nationalist movement in India half a century later. The rebellion led to the dissolution of the East India Company in 1858. It also led the British to reorganize the army, the financial system and the administration in India. The country was thereafter directly governed by the Crown as the new British Raj. East India Company's expansion in India. Although the British East India Company had established a presence in India as far back as 1612, and earlier administered the factory areas established for trading purposes, its victory in the Battle of Plassey in 1757 marked the beginning of its firm foothold in eastern India. The victory was consolidated in 1764 at the Battle of Buxar, when the East India Company army defeated Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II. After his defeat, the Mughal Emperor granted the company the right for collection of revenue in the provinces of Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha known as Diwani to the company. The company soon expanded its territories around its bases in Bombay and Madras. Later, the Anglo-Mysore Wars and the Anglo-Maratha Wars led to control of the vast regions of India. In 1806, the Vellore Mutiny was sparked by new uniform regulations that created resentment amongst both Hindu and Muslim sepoys. After the turn of the 19th century, Governor-General Wellesley began what became 2 decades of accelerated expansion of company territories. This was achieved either by subsidiary alliances between the company and local rulers or by direct military annexation. The subsidiary alliances created the princely states or native states of the Hindu Maharajas and the Muslim Nawabs. Punjab, Northwest Frontier Province, and Kashmir were annexed after the Second Anglo-Sikh War in 1849. However, Kashmir was immediately sold under the Treaty of Amritsar to the Dogra dynasty of Jammu and thereby became a princely state. The border dispute between Nepal and British India, which sharpened after 1801, had caused the Anglo-Nepalese War of 1814–16 and brought the defeated Gurkhas under British influence. In 1854, Berar was annexed, and the state of Oudh was added 2 years later. For practical purposes, the company was the government of much of India. Causes of the rebellion. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 occurred as the result of an accumulation of factors over time, rather than any single event. The sepoys were local soldiers, the majority Hindu or Muslim, that were recruited into the company's army. Just before the rebellion there were over 300,000 sepoys in the army, compared to about 50,000 British. The forces were divided into three presidency armies: Bombay, Madras, and Bengal. The Bengal Army recruited higher castes, such as Rajputs and Bhumihar, mostly from the Awadh and Bihar regions, and even restricted the enlistment of lower castes in 1855. In contrast, the Madras Army and Bombay Army were more localized, caste-neutral armies that did not prefer high-caste men. The domination of higher castes in the Bengal Army has been blamed in part for initial mutinies that led to the rebellion. In 1772, when Warren Hastings was appointed India's first Governor-General, one of his first undertakings was the rapid expansion of the company's army. Since the sepoys from Bengal, many of whom had fought against the company in the battles of Plassey and Buxar, were now suspect in British eyes, Hastings recruited farther west from the high-caste rural Rajputs and Bhumihar of Awadh and Bihar, a practice that continued for the next 75 years. However, in order to forestall any social friction, the company also took pains to adapt its military practices to the requirements of their religious rituals. Consequently, these soldiers dined in separate facilities. In addition, overseas service, considered polluting to their caste, was not required of them, and the army soon came officially to recognize Hindu festivals. This encouragement of high-caste ritual status, however, left the government vulnerable to protest, even mutiny. Whenever the sepoys detected infringement of their prerogatives, it has been suggested that after the annexation of Oudh by the East India Company in 1856, many sepoys were disquieted both from losing their perquisites as landed gentry in the Oudh courts and from the anticipation of any increased land revenue payments that the annexation might bring about. Others have stressed that by 1857, some Indian soldiers, reading the presence of missionaries as a sign of official intent, were convinced that the company was masterminding mass conversions of Hindus and Muslims to Christianity. Although earlier in the 1830s, evangelicals such as William Carey and William Wilberforce had successfully clamored for the passage of social reforms such as the abolition of sati, and allowing the remarriage of Hindu widows, there is little evidence that the sepoys' allegiance was affected by this. However, changes in the terms of their professional service may have created resentment. As the extent of the East India Company's jurisdiction expanded with victories in wars or with annexation, the soldiers were now expected not only to serve in less familiar regions, such as in Burma, but also to make do without the foreign service remuneration that had previously been their due. A major cause of resentment that arose 10 months prior to the outbreak of the rebellion was the General Service Enlistment Act of 25 July 1856. As noted above, men of the Bengal Army had been exempted from overseas service. Specifically, they were enlisted only for service in territories to which they could march. Governor-General Lord Dalhousie saw this as an anomaly, since all sepoys of the Madras and Bombay armies and the 6 general service battalions of the Bengal Army had accepted an obligation to serve overseas if required. As a result, the burden of providing contingents for active service in Burma, are readily accessible only by sea, and China had fallen disproportionately on the two smaller presidency armies. As signed into effect by Lord Canning, Dalhousie's successor as Governor-General, the Act required only new recruits to the Bengal Army to accept a commitment for general service. However, serving high-caste sepoys were fearful that it would be eventually extended to them, as well as preventing sons following fathers into an army with a strong tradition of family service. There were also grievances over the issue of promotions based on seniority. This, as well as the increasing number of European officers in the battalions, made promotion a slow progress. and many Indian officers did not reach commissioned rank until they were too old to be effective. Tallow and lard-greased cartridges. The final spark was provided by the ammunition for the new Enfield P-53 rifle. These rifles, which fired mini-A balls, had a tighter fit than the earlier muskets, and used paper cartridges that came pre-greased. To load the rifle, sepoys had to bite the cartridge open to release the powder. The grease used on these cartridges was rumored to include tallow derived from beef, which would be offensive to Hindus, and pork, which would be offensive to Muslims. At least one company official pointed out the difficulties this may cause, unless it be proven that the grease employed in these cartridges is not of a nature to offend or interfere with the prejudices of caste. It will be expedient not to issue them for test to native corps. However, in August 1856, greased cartridge production was initiated at Fort William, Calcutta, following a British design. The grease used included tallow supplied by the Indian firm of Gangadhar Banerjee & Co. By January, rumors were abroad that the Enfield cartridges were greased with animal fat. Company officers became aware of the rumors through reports of an altercation between a high-caste sepoy and a low-caste laborer at Dum Dum. The laborer had taunted the sepoy that, by biting the cartridge, he had himself lost caste. Although at this time such cartridges had been issued only at Meerut and not at Dum Dum, there had been rumors that the British sought to destroy the religions of the Indian people, and forcing the native soldiers to break their sacred code would have certainly added to this rumor, as it apparently did. The company was quick to reverse the effects of this policy in hopes that the Indians would be quelled. On the 27th of January, Colonel Richard Birch, the military secretary, ordered that all cartridges issued from depots were to be free from grease, and that sepoys could grease them themselves using whatever mixture they may prefer. A modification was also made to the drill for loading so that the cartridge was torn with the hands and not bitten. This, however, merely caused many sepoys to be convinced that the rumors were true and that their fears were justified. Additional rumors started that the paper in the new cartridges, which was glazed and stiffer than the previously used paper, was impregnated with grease. In February, a court of inquiry was held at Barrackpore to get to the bottom of these rumors. Native soldiers called as witnesses complained of the paper being stiffened like cloth in a mode of tearing, said that when the paper was burned it smelled of grease, and announced that the suspicion that the paper itself contained grease could not be removed from their minds. Civilian disquiet. The civilian rebellion was more multifarious. The rebels consisted of three groups: the feudal nobility, rural landlords called taluqdars, and the peasants. The nobility, many of whom had lost titles and domains under the doctrine of lapse, which refused to recognize the adopted children of princes as legal heirs, felt that the company had interfered with a traditional system of inheritance. Rebel leaders such as Nana Sahib and the Rani of Jhansi belonged to this group. The latter, for example, was prepared to accept East India Company supremacy if her adopted son was recognized as her late husband's heir. In other areas of central India, such as Indore and Saugor, where such loss of privilege had not occurred, the princes remained loyal to the company even in areas where the sepoys had rebelled. The second group, the taluqdars, had lost half their landed estates to peasant farmers as a result of the land reforms that came in the wake of annexation of Oudh. As the rebellion gained ground, the taluqdars quickly reoccupied the lands they had lost, and paradoxically, in part because of ties of kinship and feudal loyalty, did not experience significant opposition from the peasant farmers, many of whom joined the rebellion, to the great dismay of the British. It has also been suggested that heavy land revenue assessment in some areas by the British resulted in many landowning families either losing their land or going into great debt with money lenders, and providing ultimately a reason to rebel. Money lenders, in addition to the company, were particular objects of the rebels' animosity. The civilian rebellion was also highly uneven in its geographic distribution. Even in areas of north-central India that were no longer under British control. For example, the relatively prosperous Muzaffarnagar district, a beneficiary of a company irrigation scheme, next door to Meerut, where the upheaval began, stayed mostly calm throughout. Charles Canning, the Governor-General of India during the rebellion. Lord Dalhousie, the Governor-General of India from 1848 to 1856, who devised the doctrine of lapse. Lakshmi Bai, the Rani of Maratha, ruled Jhansi, one of the principal leaders of the rebellion who earlier had lost her kingdom as a result of the doctrine of lapse. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last Mughal emperor, crowned Emperor of India, by the Indian troops. He was deposed by the British, and died in exile in Burma. Utilitarian and evangelical, inspired social reform, including the abolition of sati and the legalization of widow remarriage, were considered by many, especially the British themselves, to have caused suspicion that Indian religious traditions were being interfered with the ultimate aim of conversion. Recent historians, including Chris Bailey, have preferred to frame this as a clash of knowledges, with proclamations from religious authorities before the revolt and testimony after it, including on such issues as the insults to women, the rise of low persons under British tutelage, the pollution caused by Western medicine, and the persecuting and ignoring of traditional astrological authorities. European-run schools were also a problem. According to recorded testimonies, anger had spread because of stories that mathematics was replacing religious instruction. Stories were chosen that would bring contempt upon Indian religions, and because girl children were exposed to moral danger by education. The justice system was considered to be inherently unfair to the Indians. The official Blue Books, East India 1855 to 1857, laid before the House of Commons during the sessions of 1856 and 1857, revealed that company officers were allowed an extended series of appeals if convicted or accused of brutality or crimes against Indians. The economic policies of the East India Company were also resented by many Indians. The Bengal Army, each of the three presidencies into which the East India Company divided India for administrative purposes, maintained their own armies. Of these, the Army of the Bengal Presidency was the largest. Unlike the other two, it recruited heavily from among high-caste Hindus and comparatively wealthy Muslims. The Muslims formed a larger percentage of the 18 irregular cavalry units within the Bengal Army, whilst Hindus were mainly to be found in the 84 regular infantry and cavalry regiments. The sepoys were therefore affected to a large degree by the concerns of the landholding and traditional members of Indian society. In the early years of the company rule, it tolerated and even encouraged the caste privileges and customs within the Bengal Army, which recruited its regular soldiers almost exclusively amongst the landowning Brahmins and Rajputs of the Bihar and Awadh. These soldiers were known as purbias. By the time these customs and privileges came to be threatened by modernizing regimes in Calcutta from the 1840s onwards, the sepoys had become accustomed to very high ritual status, and were extremely sensitive to suggestions that their caste might be polluted. The sepoys also gradually became dissatisfied with various other aspects of army life. Their pay was relatively low, and after Awadh and the Punjab were annexed, the soldiers no longer received extra pay for service there, because they were no longer considered foreign missions. The junior European officers were increasingly estranged from their soldiers, in many cases treating them as their racial inferiors. In 1856, a new Enlistment Act was introduced by the company, which in theory made every unit in the Bengal Army liable to service overseas. Although it was intended to apply to only new recruits, the serving sepoys feared that the act might be applied retroactively to them as well. A high-caste Hindu who travelled in the cramped conditions of a wooden troop ship, could not cook his own food on his own fire, and accordingly risked losing caste through ritual pollution.